then we're going to bring our panelists forward.
So this panel we're super excited about. It's around AI and open source. So we have a number of speakers. We're waiting for a few of them to turn on their videos. So if you can go ahead and do that, that would be great. And for those of you who have noticed, we've had a few people come in and out. We're just working with some technical glitches on the platform. So we're just in the background trying to take them off as quickly as possible. So apologies to our speakers when somebody comes in. We're doing our best over here. So with that, I'm going to bring Amanda to screen. Let's see, Amanda, Chase.
Yes, we see you.
Courtney's next.
Hi, Chase. Courtney.
Matt. And
Courtney,
Nina.
Dear friend. Courtney, congratulations again on Kuverno graduating. That was all the buzz at KubeCon in Amsterdam recently. I know that was a lot of work, so shout out to Team Kuverno, Team Nirmata. And okay, now back to our panelists.
So we'll just hopefully Nina will join on the camera, but with that, we're gonna duck on out. Let's just do a sound check. Can we hear all of you? Amanda, can we hear you?
Good afternoon.
Yes, we can. And Chase?
This is a test.
Perfect. Matt?
I love facts.
Amazing. And we did hear you, Courtney. And so we're going to duck out and hopefully Nina will be present. And
we hear that guitar. That's what we want to hear.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all.
Okay, everybody, are we waiting for Nina or we'll just kick off, I think. So good afternoon, I'm Amanda Brock. I'm the CEO at Open UK, which is an industry organization / policy body / think tank here in the UK. We are very much focused on UK leadership and global collaboration in open technology, so software, hardware, data standards, and AI. Increasingly in AI over the last 2 to 3 years. We also have a second organization, a sister organization called OpenHQ, which is more internationally focused around open source, open tech policy. And I can promise you this afternoon, an interesting discussion. It's certainly going to be better than the Boston Tea Party if you're British. And we're going to wander through agentic AI and AI's impact on open source over the next 40 minutes. I'm going to try and keep the questions or the answers at least pretty punchy so that we get through everything we have planned for today and then have maybe 5 minutes or so to answer questions. So feel free to get those questions going in the chat. And we will then have a sort of closing 5 minutes from our speakers. And our speakers today, I'm going to start with the easy one for me, Matt Barker. Matt, who I've known for 20 years, is the founder and CEO of Bolt MCP. And some of you will know him from JetStack, his first startup. I know him because he was at Canonical with me in 2008 onwards. And he is a major force these days in agentic and identity, focused on securing and controlling AI's access to data using MCP skills and authorization. In his recent role at Palo Alto, he's focused on AI agent identity and how to keep secrets out of AI agent environments using the identity standard SPIFFE. And I'm sure we'll hear more about SPIFFE and agentic security from Matt as the session goes on. With the guitars behind him, we have Chase Pettit. And Chase is a principal security engineer. He spent 7 years at Wikimedia and he's an OWASP contributor. His latest work is on supply chain risk, completely relevant to what we're going to be talking about today with AI and open source. And he's been focused on the new secure development lifecycle code for open source AI. I've spent I have not. He has spent the majority of his career on the layers underneath. I'm not good at reading and I don't know these bios off by heart. I'm much better at speaking. And then we have Courtney Nickerson, who I also know very well. And Courtney has been engaged with Open UK and our State of OpenCon over the last few years. She's on the advisory board there. She's also a CNCF ambassador. And in her day job, she's head of community at Nirmata and a core leader of Kuverno, which we just heard graduated recently. So congratulations, Courtney. And then our fourth panelist, who is happily on screen now, Nina. Nina is Senior Principal Software Engineer at Solo. She is the Kubernetes release lead for 133, contributor to the Kubernetes release team, maintainer of Agent Gateway, K-Gateway, and an active contributor to K-Agent, all of which sounds like it's going to be right up the street of this conversation today. So I'm going to come with 4 questions to the panel and ask them of all of you. And we're all really challenged, right, as to whether or not open source and AI, whether AI is a friend or foe. In the 18, 20 years I've been working in open source, we've seen so much change, so many challenges across open source. Sometimes I wonder if this is just the next flood or the next overwhelm that we have to deal with. But day to day, projects are trying to fathom how to manage AI. And increasingly, we're seeing AI being treated as a colleague, as an individual in the workplace and in projects. But we also see it used to help us as tools. So I'm going to start, before we get into the colleague type scenario where AI is an active contributor in its own right to tools. And I'm going to ask the panel, I am asking the panel, how are you using tools? What are your experience of tools, AI tools around open source? Are they supporting coding? Are they beneficial? Are they making a difference to your life? And I'm going to come over first, I think, to Chase.
Okay, first it is. Yeah, I'm using a lot of the things that I think most of us are, Claude Code specifically, and it's helped me to onboard to a few open source projects quicker than I think I would have in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big plus, like the lift to sort of conceptual understanding. Like, I use AI more for breaking things down and walking me through a project than anything else, but I do generate code. I'm kind of on the Debian side, I guess. Recently, they kind of came out with AI from their perspective is not a contributor. It's all back to the human. What tools you use to kind of come up with a contribution is your discretion, but ultimately only a human being can be held accountable and also, at least for now, be part of a community. And I feel like the community aspect just gets more important, not less.
And I think that's exactly the balance, right? So we're seeing people using AI as a tool, and that tool actually, as you say, being productive. Courtney, you're very community focused. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride the last year, especially in our open source project. Our teams obviously been using AI for various things, and I think we've used just about every coding agent possible, from Cursor Code to now Claude Code. Everybody has some sort of GitHub Copilot that they're working with. But we have seen, I wrote an article about this. It truly happened. One of our maintainers put in the Slack, we just got 20 PRs in 15 minutes. That moment changed so many things for us. It was the first just onslaught of AI generated PRs, and community has been a very important partner in helping our team actually maintain our code, especially moving into graduation, because when all of a sudden you have onslaughts of PRs, and we do all have to remember, and I think Nina can probably speak very clearly to this as a maintainer,
Mm-hmm.
65% of maintainers are not paid to maintain these projects. They are already exhausted. It is such a heavy lift. The bigger the project and community, the heavier lift it is. And AI isn't going to completely change that. What it's going to do is make it very clear where systems are failing us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And community has become a huge partner. We're incredibly lucky in our project to have such an active community to help us get through a lot of those PR reviews, to stop part of that AI slop that's been coming in, to not participate in the slop so much. And to give us some bandwidth and feedback so that we could create some governance around how PRs and contributions are made into our repo.
Thanks, Courtney. And I think that's quite a nice segue, Nina, into your workload as a maintainer and whether or not AI is actually offering you tooling that's beneficial.
Yeah, I think it's definitely hurting and helping somehow, ironically, at the same time. So day to day, I do use all the coding agents. So right now I'm on Codex, but I've used Cursor and Claude in the past as well. So I definitely see the benefit firsthand. Like I've been writing less code from scratch. Like whenever I have a new issue, I like talk to my agent first and like plan out how I'm going to approach it. So it's hard to criticize the community for doing the same thing when I'm using AI every day. But I do see it especially on the review side. Like Copilot has gone better at reviews for community PRs, but it's still not perfect. Like you do need the person who's putting up the PR to understand every single line of code. And we're seeing that it's like now it's easier to generate code that looks correct at a first glance, but once you start digging into it, it's really not something you want to merge into the repo. And it's a little sad because I think a lot of the good first issues that would help to me onboard into open source projects now are very easy to solve with AI without fully understanding the code base. So it's, I think, harder actually for contributors to get involved into an open source project because they might be closing PRs quickly, but not fully understanding how the full project works. So they're like it's harder to become like a full-time maintainer of open source projects now that it's so easy to like quickly close out one line PRs with your coding agent. So yeah, it's interesting how like in a short year like we've definitely changed how people contribute and how many contributions they're getting.
It's super interesting. We have been looking at that. I use the word discernment, and I keep being told I mean critical thinking, but I don't. I mean discernment. I mean the ability to understand and choose. And I think when you look at AI outputs, whatever kind of output it is, you have to have that knowledge, that ability to discern before you decide what to do with the code, with the written word. And I feel like the skills that you need to evolve that are there for those who are senior, but not for the juniors, as you say. And I've been trying to challenge that open source is a good way to build those skills, even if they're missing in the workplace. And actually, you may just have destroyed my argument if it's difficult at that grassroots level. So now I'm worried about that as well. So thank you for the additional worry. Matt, how are you seeing tools being used? Are they being used productively?
Well, obviously, I'm not an engineer. I'm a business dude, but my co-founder obviously is, and he actually was. He has some experience. He worked at Anthropic, and he was a very early contributor and built a lot of the documentation out for Claude Code originally. And obviously, he's been building for the past year, and it's all obviously AI generated. A lot of it's Claude. I think when it comes to open source and what it means for how we use it in the context of AI, I'm most interested at the moment, as when I'm going to speak to customers, is how they're starting with Claude Code or Codex or Cursor or one of these, but very quickly their mind goes to, can I protect my data against some of these foundation models, and how do I think about like the various different sensitivity of my data, and should I be actually opening my data to some of these foundation models? And actually, if they don't trust some of those companies, they are actually starting to look at open source models for protecting really, really sensitive data more in on-prem environments. So that's been quite an interesting one. Then the other thing I think I'm starting to hear is a lot of these companies realize that the value they're getting from these models is so great that it's likely that they're subsidized. If everyone remembers how cheap Uber was when it first came out, like the fact that we're getting such value from these frontier models, is that going to last? So they're actually already starting to think about whether they could use smaller, lighter weight open source models to kind of do specific things. And so I'm particularly interested in how various different open source models that are either fine-tuned or just off the shelf can end up kind of enhancing the experience you would just get from one of these big proprietary frontier models. And I'm actually already starting to see customers starting to explore that and talk about it and think about it. So that's what I'm particularly interested in.
And while you're talking about models, I'm going to stick with you for the second question. Before we really get into supply chain, what we're seeing is models being trained on open source software, and shifting the dynamic a lot.
I don't like this.
Go on.
Well, I don't know. It's kind of like I feel like the cat has been thrown amongst the pigeons, because I've just been so used to working with open source and understanding it in a certain way. And obviously, I created an open source project myself, and I put it under an Apache 2.0 license, and I kind of fully expected it was going to get used by Red Hat and Amazon and Google, which it was. For anyone that doesn't know, it's a project called Cert Manager, which does automated certificate lifecycle management in Kubernetes. But now that I'm seeing the likes of Next.js sort of get copied, rebuilt, the license changed, a new wrapper put on the front. There was a YC startup that got kicked out of the fund because they took weirdly a cohort's open source project, forked it, changed it, put a wrapper on it, changed the license. And there's even like a full-blown company now called, I think it's called Malice, which takes open source software, rebuilds it, changes the license. I'm kind of scared of open source at this point in time, which is kind of a bit odd for me because I've been such a champion of it for so long. So I think there's like an amazingly strong role still for open source to play when it comes to how we think about consuming models. And like, that's great, manage it well, secure it, run it on your own infrastructure. But from a commercial perspective, I'm very concerned. And actually, I'm starting off with this new company with proprietary on-prem software, I'm so sorry to say. And I'm going to figure out maybe what I can open over time. And it's just because I'm nervous. I mean, I always knew that, it was possible to go and fork a project and kind of rebuild it yourself. But I think with the way that AI can do it and sort of the additional sort of speed with which that can happen, I'm sort of taking a slightly different approach this time. We lost Amanda. You're back. You didn't miss much more at the end.
I can still hear you.
Oh, okay. Oh, fine.
So I'm going to come back on that to the other three panelists. I don't know. I could see, Nina, during Matt's comments, you were nodding away. And I just want to sort of finish off that AI training conversation before we move into supply chain. Any thoughts?
Definitely. So one of the projects I'm a maintainer of is Agent Gateway. So it's a gateway that does LLM consumption, MCP routing, and related to this, LLM inference. So the Kubernetes community has actually started thinking about this, like for self-hosted models. How do we have like a standard to route to those models? So there's been a lot of work in the inference extensions on top of Gateway API for this. So we do see like users are interested in self-hosted models and going in that direction. I think I slightly disagree about the you can own every single open source project yourself. Just because if I think about like what dependencies I have in my code base today, could I really have my AI agent generate all of them and maintain them? And I think the answer is still no. So I think there's always going to be a place for open source. It is changing how quickly like people contribute to it and how we trust those contributions. But I don't think we'll ever get into a state where one person owns the entire stack themselves, where they have no dependencies on external open source projects. So yes, there have been one-off attempts to fork different projects. I think there was a joke April Fool's implementation of forking Kubernetes and rewriting it in Rust, but
what a good idea.
Yeah, very funny. But I had a kick out of it because Agent Gateway is a gateway written in Rust, so it is nice to see the community embracing the Rust. But if I again think back on all the dependencies my projects have, I think it's not reasonable for one person or one company to own all the dependencies, even with the AI tools that exist today.
Does anybody else want to come in on that topic? Courtney?
Sure. I can go. I mean, there's several dimensions to the whole thing. One is legal, the other is ideology, and then there's practicality. Like, I've seen a lot of sort of single maintainer projects pop up because you can create something through natural language. The barriers are lower. I'm not sure whether those will be around in 6 months or a year. So am I going to throw in with them and like put my time and energy into it when, kind of generally in the past, when something kind of rose to prominence, you knew that someone had spent a lot of time thinking about it and thinking about the edge cases. And, it was a passion project in many, many cases. And so it had some durability, or at least more than I kind of perceived the plethora of emergent sort of it spikes and stars and then I don't hear about it again. But I do really think that likely the licensing landscape will change. I've talked to a few open source maintainers who are kicking around, how to kind of prove that their code was used in training when the license indicates that it shouldn't be. I feel like that's going to be an interesting arena. There are some mathematical probability elements to where you can effectively say the chances of a model regurgitating this particular thing is like, virtually impossible, and thus we've got you. What that means in the end from a kind of enforcement and legal mechanism, I don't think anybody knows. but I suspect that it'll be something like a bigger shift akin to the Elasticsearch and AWS drift, where, you know, one of the sayings that I've heard before is always assume good faith, but assume good faith is not a suicide pact. And like, we're going to get to the place where just because someone pours time and energy into open source, that, you know, free isn't beer, right? We would often say when someone created an open source project internally and threw it up and said, hey, I made this great thing, it's wonderful, can you run it, you know, for the duration? And that's great, but it's closer to being given a puppy than it is being given a tool. You know, the care and feeding is really, and always has been, the hard and expensive part. So I just think we don't know yet, but it'll be interesting.
Courtney?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you just said, and also we're living that, right? Our project has 3 billion image downloads. We do have an active contributor community, but to maintain a project at the size that we're at, and also now in the era of AI and CVEs, and we're also like a security focused project, taking on the weight of that is the expensive part. Making sure that things continue to be safe and that there is a human in the loop who has the discernment, which is the correct word in my opinion, Amanda, is totally necessary. But at the same time, things are moving so quickly, it's incredibly difficult to train a new era of people to then have that discernment. CVEs come in incredibly quickly. We've seen them, the last 3 weeks has just been an onslaught everywhere. They're affecting everyone. And also I do somewhat see, I mean, there more and more we see people forking our repo and turning it into something that they think they can maintain. Now, whether they can or can't is that is to be seen, but also with the speed with which AI is adapting to things and continuing to evolve, while they might not be able to maintain that now or turn it into a product and put a wrapper on it now that's feasible within a year from now, it's hard to really be able to say that that won't be the case. And so I'm not sure I don't think it's the case right now where everyone's going to be able to be dependent only upon themselves and take over all of the dependencies that they currently have in their projects. But I do think that that is a possibility at some point if things continue to evolve as quickly as they do. And also because the legality of licensing, there's so many holes in how to manage these things and how to understand them. We have governance that if you wrote the prompt, you own the output of that, right? But also in a real legal situation, does that stand up? It does for in some cases, it does not in others, right? And so I think we are all struggling to keep up. None of us really know where this is going to evolve to. But the future of open source, it's very clear, will be very different than what we've had until now. And that includes what communities look like, how people function in it, what humans in the loop actually do and what that means, and what contribution looks like. It's changing quickly.
That's a really good segue, I think, into the supply chain piece. And I agree that the licensing is a big challenge. I didn't say at the beginning, I'm an ex-lawyer, spent 25 years as a lawyer, and I've worked around sort of legal issues and open source since 2008. I think, and in the chat, they've started the conversation about inbound. So the license is always how we share the IP and what we create. And there's questions about whether, if it's created by AI, there's even copyright there to license. We don't know. We don't know about the liability or the IP ownership for the prompter and whether that will be the same in every country. So I think we just have to work on the basis that we're doing the best we can. And I suspect that actually the real battleground over time won't be copyright. I think it's a bit of a red herring. I think the real battleground is going to be around models to ensure that humans are able to still do content. I think the copyright piece will go away quite quickly, and that's a whole different conversation. But the inbound for us in today's model we're seeing projects start to shift. Linux Foundation made some announcements last week. We're looking at contribution agreements requiring AI coding to be called out on that sort of risk and liability basis. We've got things like the Developer Certificate of Originality, DCO, where it's going to be increasingly difficult if you are creating your code on AI to meet the requirements of that. And then we're going to have to work out how we do these things, and there will be a shift in our practices and our processes. So I just want to open this up to the panelists, probably coming back first to you, Matt. As we see this shift, supply chain, what does this mean for our supply chain and keeping it secure? How is that going to impact open source?
It's quite scary. I think that the thing that I found about with supply chain, the more I went into it, the more I realized the more you know, the scarier it becomes.
Yeah.
And the harder it is for you to really truly be able to protect yourself. So you kind of just have to do the best you can do with what you've got. I think the thing that most concerns me, and it's a topic that I focus on a lot in my last job, is just how easily secrets get leaked already, and how many there are on GitHub already. So I mean, I always use this stat that last year there were 22 million secrets that were found on GitHub alone. This is like long-lived, like API keys and tokens and so on, and that was up from 17 million the year before. And so it's increasing at 25% year on year, and that's without the AI wave hitting us, because AI is so good at just consuming this stuff, not really knowing what it is, and then leaking it. And so I think it's like this sort of like combined threat of secrets are easier to leak, and with AI, once you're in an organization, you can do so much more damage with it. So it's that combined threat that really concerns me. So I guess my job in my last company was figuring out how to keep secrets out of the entire AI environment by essentially using identity, or PKI, with this short-lived identity called Spiffy, so that we could actually keep secrets out of these environments to try and reduce the threat of them being leaked and then used against you. So that was one thing. So I think that's quite useful. And then the great thing about identity is, and I know I'm talking about this from an identity lens, is like, can you trust your agent? Can you trust your workloads? Do you know what they are? Do you know who created them and where they're from? So I think there's a large part to play with identity. And then I think the final thing is we're going to have to figure out how to use AI to protect us from AI. And I'm not entirely sure how that looks, but I know there's a lot of startups that are looking at governance and sort of guardrails and making sure the AI does the right thing at the right time and spotting anomalies and so on. So this is not a solved area. I just think it's a lot of it's going to come down to trust, identity, and then like proper guardrails that we can put in place to try and maintain some sort of semblance of trust and not so we don't all start freaking out and sort of like shut everything down. So yeah, it's a really tricky problem, and I'm honestly quite nervous, because we've already seen so many big attacks. I mean, we saw it was Vercel, it was like Axiom, we've got Light LLM and Trivy, we saw Maltbook and OpenClaw. I just think it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And we've not really even seen the attackers start to properly use it, full scale. So yeah, I'm not really giving. I don't mean to be too much of a doom monger, but we're just going to have to think very carefully about how we control it and manage it and do the best we can.
I think that's interesting from the perspective of open source versus corporates, right? Or proprietary code, because I wonder if it's actually any different between the two. It's just that, again, all of the challenges and the vulnerabilities are very public in open source. And then we have these open conversations that a lot of corporate environments wouldn't have. I'm going to...
I just got a comment as well from Alex in the chat. And obviously we do love our creative communities. It is one thing that I'm seeing, and that is obviously the CEO is saying we need to bring AI in, and the engineers are going off and sort of doing quite a lot of stuff already. And I had one AI director say to me the other day that they're seeing so much power and sort of feedback and positive results from AI that they've almost switched off their brain to the security risks. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like they're kind of blindly just going and using this technology and just making it happen. And that's where we're finding like MCP servers all over the place, skills on developers' laptops, and these have no concept of auth. So if we remember when HashiCorp Vault came out and we had the secret sprawl and secret stores everywhere, I do worry a little bit that we're actually creating a worse version of that right now with all these these different tools are out there and that are pretty much ungoverned, uncontrolled, and the security teams have just got no clue what's going on. So I mean, it's not easy to say to a security person, oh, you need to get that under control and start figuring it out, because actually, like the sort of the desire to go and actually compete using AI is so much stronger than it is to sort of secure it. But we're going to have to, I think security teams are going to have to think fast about how they enable this technology and help keep these developers on track with it.
And that security piece is only a part of it, right? Trust is a bigger thing than just security. It's about a source of origin, and understanding, the quality of the person that's created the code base, which is something we've always relied on. I once asked Alison Randall why open source engineers do open source projects. I'm sure she won't mind me quoting her in this, and she told me it's because they have bad managers, and their managers don't let them do what they want to do and ought to do. Therefore, they go and do these projects in their own time. But those are folks that really know what they need and what's missing in the ecosystem, which is how you can rely on what they bring forward. So, Chase, I want to come back to you. This vibe coding and increase in software production, it has to change the trust rubric with new projects. But how is that panning out?
I mean, to the point made earlier, the supply chain conundrum does get scarier the more you sort of understand it. Like,
so it's not just like what it is, like an SBOM where you're identifying it. There's another level, another layer to it. Is that
for sure?
Right.
So, like, at least from my perspective, there are the problems that have always existed, which are likely to get worse. And then I'm sort of thinking through right now the layer kind of behind that, which has become more dynamic. So it's always been interesting and even important, like what tools are used to create software, especially in open source. One of my favorite papers is the Reflections on Trusting Trust by Ken Thompson, which is just all about what happens if you compromise the compiler and it can silently compromise every program that it compiles. But what I'm seeing is, like, yes, the business case is strong, and so people are sharing and resharing skills, plugins. Like, this is the supply chain that I'm terrified of, I guess. It's a matter of when and not if. And I think we're already seeing some pretty clever attacks. It seems to have moved from how can I hijack and kind of repurpose your cycles to do a thing, to how can I covertly influence the outcomes when you use these tools. And that to me is very nefarious. Like, when I see plugins passed around, they're not versioned, oftentimes they're not licensed explicitly. People aren't vetting them. In many cases, the folks who are using them, they don't necessarily have the acumen to vet them respectfully. And so when I get to a place where tooling or logic or however you want to frame it, that is determining what and how things get created, is sort of a completely new open field that isn't yet mature even to the standard of kind of the historic complexities. I don't know exactly what the solution is, but that is terrifying. Yeah.
Thank you. And sort of moving slightly from that, the risk element to the practicalities of how this is managed. Nina, as a maintainer, how are you seeing both your own projects and others dealing with, garbage in, garbage out, the volume flop? I hadn't really understood just the scale, because people talk about it and it's a lot. And then I think Jimmy Wales was speaking at something about Wikipedia that we were part of. And he was talking about just the fact that it doesn't just look at one page on a Wikipedia site the way that a human would. It looks at everything all at once, and it's just loading so much onto the projects. How are maintainers managing that?
Yeah, I think the big thing that someone actually mentioned in the chat is every project that I know of right now is trying to build a generative AI policy. So I know the Linux Foundation has one. that kind of states that your generative AI tool use has to be consistent with the license, the project's intellectual property, and like the open source definition. So things like, the free distribution, you have to allow modifications to the derived works, things like that still have to be in place. The question is, how are you enforcing that, right? So on K-Gateway and Agent Gateway, we've actually added some addendums to this policy. So we've asked people to refrain from generating issues, comments, and PR descriptions purely with AI. So like when you post something, you have to take ownership of it. This means like also if you have to sign all your commits, so you are responsible for the work that you're putting out there. One thing that we've also had to implement as part of the Linux Foundation mentorship program is we get a bunch of influx of young, eager new contributors who want to participate in the program, but it's very overwhelming for maintainers to review all of them, often because they're also like pretty low quality, like AI generated PRs, because these are people just getting started, they're like playing around with the project. So we've had, as part of that program, try to limit the number of contributions from people who want to participate to have like one good PR that can show, their background, like show that they've like taken the time to understand the project. Again, like that's good on paper. Like I think it's a good start, but it's very hard to enforce because you don't know, again, who the person is. Like, are they trying to be part of this program? Are they just, generating a bunch of PRs to get their GitHub stats up? So yeah, I think that it all boils down to like it's like trust, right? So you have to trust the person putting up the PR has good intentions, and it's worth your time to review it because it's going to make the project better. And that's really hard to determine, especially in the day of AI agents that are autonomously opening PRs, without any human intervention.
Yeah. And I think that sort of shift that we're seeing isn't just about maintainers as individuals or projects putting in barriers. Historically in open source, people didn't always want to give their name. We didn't know who all the contributors were. And that shift to now having to be able to identify a human to trust how they're using AI is a huge shift for us. Courtney, I know that your working community is looking at how all these different things are impacting the open source projects, but one of the things I'm really seeing is a shift in community. I think it really is changing. A lot of these projects can be created at scale without the usual volume of people doing the heavy lifting. And, that shifts the trust dynamic that our communities are built on. So I just wanted to come to you to sort of get some more thoughts about that trust dynamic and how it's shifting, but also one of the things we talked about in advance was policy as code and guardrails and how that gets managed, so picking up on Nina's conversation there.
Yeah, absolutely. Communities are definitely shifting. In some ways, they seem like they are more active, but that's not entirely true. So you might get an onslaught of contributions from 4 or 5 people, whereas before we would get 20 people making the same number of contributions. So that diversification has definitely changed. And as we all know, across the entire ecosystem, there is a problem with diversification, especially in code base. And so to see those changes happen and to try to mediate them and figure out how to continue to have more and more people involved is quite complicated, to be honest. Very much what Nina was saying, we also participate in LFX mentorship. We do see people making huge contributions and then expecting to get chosen, despite the fact that their contributions have oftentimes been generated by AI. So we've taken a very similar stance to that. We also have an AI usage policy that our agent ND refers to, where contributors can only open 5 PRs at one time. This is the sanity of our maintainers, as well as contributors to not feel like they're not getting attention because there are real contributors out there who want to learn, who are trying to learn the code base, who are doing a lot of these things with some help from AI for learning, but not to create their complete PR. And so if we don't put some of those limitations on things, those people get lost in the mix. And those oftentimes are the diverse people that we need and want to have participating in our projects. But at the same time, I also see that there are a lot of people even more intimidated to participate than before. So now they're sitting there going, oh, wow, I can see that I can create a PR very quickly and that I can throw out this code, but I don't really understand this code. And I'm terrified to go ask the question about it because I don't want anybody to know that I used AI to even get started here. And so I saw a really interesting poll where it was something like 85% of developers said that they were using AI, but only 22% actually say so in their PR because it's so frowned upon by their general public, and especially junior devs know this, right? And so some of them will be really outgoing and go ahead for it anyway, but a lot of folks who take this much more seriously as a career path don't. And so I see a lot of that going on in our community. In terms of guardrails, I think policy as code is now going to be incredibly important for everyone. I love the fact that Matt was talking about secret sprawl. It is to be seen if machines do a better job of keeping secrets than humans do in so many ways. But the guardrails are now a thing. If you aren't ensuring that everyone, as well as your fleet of agents, know what rules they're playing by at admission, you now have a problem. And so we have seen a massive increase in people all of a sudden jumping into our community with really, really keen questions about, hey, can you help me set up this policy because I need to manage a fleet. We also see a huge amount of, I need to manage cost. Because we're sitting here seeing people, oh, I'm 10 times more productive, but we have half the team and 10 times the expense. And so we have a lot of people who are coming to us asking about, hey, can you help me with a governance around token costs, around code that's being shipped, around infrastructure, around secrets, around just about anything. And so I do think that as we see more security issues come up and that supply chain change with AI generated code becoming part of it, and people realizing you can't actually trace everything that's going on. And SBOM, how clear is it when the code was actually created by a machine and not a human that's pulling from so many different places? Policies and governance around your infrastructure and practices become exponentially more important, and that shift left all of a sudden has become very real very quickly for so many people that kept putting it off.
I've tried as we've gone to pick up the questions in the chat and to weave them into what we've had as a discussion, and I'm not sure that there's anything specific that we haven't covered at a high level. At least there is a question there about somebody having mentioned a security policy from Laurie Apple. And the one that I was referencing wasn't so much a security policy, but it's one that Linus has published on GitHub as AI coding assistance. And I've been trying to copy it on my phone and make it copy onto my desktop, which hasn't worked. So I will share it once we finish this, so I don't end up destroying the video and the streaming. Does anybody else have anything specific on that they wanted to share that they'd mentioned earlier? It's Laurie Apple's question about security and AI proposal. I think it's this one, but does anybody have anything else that, no? This one is the one that came out of LF that Linus shared. Okay. And I think we've covered most of the conversation in the chat. If there's anything specific, I think everybody will be around for a short time afterwards when we can answer any questions. I just want to come back around all of you before we wrap up, because we're bang on time, and ask you that final question. So AI and open source. From an open source perspective, is AI our friend or our foe? And I'm going to come to you first, Chase.
Okay, I'm going to dodge the question and say neither. It's just a tool. Right now we're in kind of I'm going to use the word mania over it. And so many moons ago, I learned functional programming. And there was a period of probably 3 years where just about everything I wrote was like ideologically bent towards functional programming is better. And eventually I integrated it into like the broader application of just writing and maintaining software. And so I think right now the pendulum has swung quite far one way, and the social systems will evolve. I thought it was interesting when you mentioned earlier the Wikipedia governance models, because they do have fairly sophisticated human governance models. It was noted like, hey, if we limit the number of PRs a new person could open, kind of limits the blast radius of chaos for automation run wild. There's a fairly significant stratified kind of human governance organization around kind of commons oriented projects where there are stewards, there are limits on early contributors, that kind of thing. I think likely that side of the open source world, outside of sort of the Wikipedia projects, will also evolve, and like it will become more friend than foe, I hope.
So, and to become more friend and foe, it sounds like you're saying there's a bit of maturing or growing up to do along the way. My bet would be that standards, whether they're de facto or real, are going to be a big part of that. And Matt, you're building a business around a de facto standard MCP, open source and AI. Is AI a friend or foe?
AI or open source?
AI. Open source is obviously a friend.
I don't think that I could ever say that open source is not a friend. I feel like I'd be I can't.
You wouldn't be on this conversation if you could.
I can't disown open source. I think more it's more. I've kind of been shocked because I've kind of like had a mental model of the way that open source works, and like how you build businesses around it, how you distribute it, how you build communities, and I just feel like that's been like thrown into complete like my mind's been thrown into complete turmoil. So I think I'm retracting from that and sort of like starting again from the ground up and almost like figuring out what open source means in this new world, because it's almost like I'm having to start again and like rebuild a friendship with open source in a completely different standing to what I've known it in the past. So open source definitely a friend. I would just say it really depends on what you're trying to do with it at this point. And I feel like AI is a friend. Yeah, we will build. I'm an AI optimist. I really feel like we'll end up being able to control it. I mean, yeah, and I think I have a feeling that like humans will all. I mean, I really hope we can do this. Humans will always be able to control ultimately what the AI is doing. If we don't, then we really do have a problem. And if you believe that, then we'll always have a role to play. But I think one thing I would finish with is it feels like in this conversation it's been really interesting is that the more AI generated stuff we get, we have to deal with, the more we're like reverting back to like human trust to kind of like figure it out based on who's behind it. Can they support it? Can they give me like a good PR? Whatever it is. And I think it's really fascinating. It's the same with like hiring and so on. There's so much like AI generated CVs. Like you kind of like into your own network, and so I think it's really interesting to see how we're kind of reverting back to like starting again with like the human trust, and then we'll kind of build back up with the AI trust. So it's almost like let's start with humans, and then like as we start to trust the AI more, let's like let it be a bit more autonomous. But I think it's going to be a journey.
I'm old enough to have been through the .com boom, and we never used to have email at our desks. And what we did before email was our jobs. And I think that that's a similar shift to what you're experiencing here and what you're talking about. And I kind of like the fact that you're talking about it sort of reinvigorating your relationship with open source. So it's like a second.
It is, yes. Yeah, it's true. We've just got remarried. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to say that, but yeah. Nina.
Yeah, I feel like our conversations have been mostly doom and gloom around open source, like AI affecting open source. But I think when I work with my coding agent, I always like feel like I'm working with it like a friend. So it's hard to not anthropomorphize your coding agent, I guess. So it's hard to not say it's a friend, because I do get benefits out of it, and I think I see the upside of it day to day. But I think as we evolve and add more, guardrails around our agents and standards around how we integrate, use of agents in open source, I think it will get better. We're just right now in a spot where there's not a lot of standards. It's like everything's moving very quickly. So it's hard to, look at the upsides and not discuss like what's lacking right now. But I am also, I guess, an optimist because I do like my coding agent. It's my friend. So how can I call it a foe when I use it every day?
I think that's really interesting. And I'm going to say something that I think I'm allowed to say, which is that we've gone from a marriage to a friend with benefits, because you've talked about the benefits that this agent brings you in a way that is not a human relationship, but getting there. And one of the things that I've really been challenged by in recent weeks is people wanting to make agents part of a team and, making people redundant and then putting an agent in their role. And that's quite a difficult concept. And it comes back every time for me, Courtney, to community. Courtney, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, I would say right now, AI and open source have a frenemy type of relationship where you're a friend with benefits and I'm producing a lot, but also you might take my job and steal my context and not give it back to me. And I'm not really sure yet because nobody's decided like where this relationship is going. And so it's a very dynamic relationship, as are humans, and the way we relate to everything. I think we also relate in a very dynamic way to AI, whether it's the LLM or the MCP, and how we're writing skills, guardrails, and how we write our prompts. Every single one of us is our own individual person, and we relate to AI that then has to relate back to each one of us in such a weird way that I find that right now we're in a frenemy type of situation. But I do think that as time evolves and we evolve our own relationships with AI and how we want it to be used, because I think a lot of people right now, it's a production instrument. I'm going to make life easier. I'm going to do more things. And at some point, humans inevitably come back to the fact that, oh, maybe I need to take a deep breath and go outside and calm my nervous system and connect with myself again. And so I think like everything that we come into contact with will probably go through that maturity in our relationship with AI and how we use it.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you as a panel. We've had a great conversation today. People keep trying to join us and extend this panel. It's been so good. I think that the end of this, when we talk about supply chain and risk, clearly there are different risks. There are different controls needed. There are different standards, different processes. The whole relationship with this tool is changing. Constantly for the last year or two, we've been saying AI is a tool. Maybe that's shifting slightly, but I think we have to remember at the end of the day that it's here to serve humanity and not the other way around. And we have to think about it as being here to serve open source projects too. So thank you everybody for joining us, and good luck to the next session. I think they're having a fireside chat. Thank you.
Yeah, and Amanda, I actually have one question for you as we're waiting for our next panelists or next fireside chat folks to get their camera and mics going. Just a quick question, and maybe for all of you, but just we have time for maybe one or two answers. Do you feel like AI is giving you time back, or is it costing you time? The big promise was like, oh, AI is going to help us do everything faster and we're going to get all this extra time to do cool stuff. And maybe this is a hypothetical question, but do you feel like AI gives you more time or less?
I don't think I'm using it as much as I should be, because I, as with many things, was an early stage user and it didn't do what I needed. And that discernment meant that I used it less and less because it was letting me down. It speeds me up in the early stages of things. But I actually think my experience is also not as good as most of the engineers, because I think we're seeing AI is better at coding than it is at natural language, at creating documents and that kind of thing. Anybody else want to jump in?
Seeing a lot of burnout with engineers who just
that surprised me.
Fortunately, yeah. I mean, I think it's much more productive, but it's people just don't know when to stop, and it feels like it's becoming a little bit of an addiction amongst my friends, and it's leading to stress and burnout. But it's also making them much more productive. So
yeah. I appreciated the frenemy comment, Courtney. I think that's very realistic for many of us. But okay, well, I'm going to say thank you so much to everybody here. And we are going to start moving people backstage and bringing our fireside chat. And if you see any questions that weren't answered, feel free to stay backstage and answer.